and welcome to the 9 to 5 podcast. My name is Scott, and we have Mark and Seth here. Why don't you guys say hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Cool. So today we're going to talk about Judge Koh's Samsung decision, kind of the new progress that's been made, or progress that's been made with the Samsung decision. We'll also talk about iWatch, some Ken Siegel news, or some of the things that he leaked or told this week, as well as the music streaming service that Apple is working on. There's been a lot of news coming out about that service. So let's jump right into the Apple versus Samsung case. There was $450 million that was cut from the case due to impermissible legal theory. So Judge Koh has been having a lot of fun with this case in general, trying to decide how it should be broken down, how the money is being broken down. So there's still pending appeals coming up. So Mark, do you see that the amount of $450 million due to this impermissible legal theory, was that really justified? Did it make any sense?
I mean, when you think about the ruling in the beginning in general, the $1 billion figure, I mean, that was, it doesn't really make a difference to Apple monetarily. I mean, they have so much cash and so much, stuff going on. The $1 billion doesn't affect them. It was more of a values thing, as Tim Cook put it. The judge and the court and the jury ruling, hey, Samsung ripped off Apple. And that ruling stands for the majority. It's just a monetary thing. And when you're talking about dollars and cents in the hundreds of millions for Apple, I mean, it doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't make a difference to what Samsung has to pay either. I mean, it's not a big deal because the moral stands.
Yeah, so it seems to be more of the principle rather than the amount for Apple and Samsung. Whether or not they stole, whether or not they infringed upon these patents, how they built Android up, or any of that kind of stuff. So do you think it's all about principle for this case? It doesn't really have to do with the amount of money?
For Apple, I mean, I'm certain it's for principle. Tim Cook said it the same. So did Apple's PR statement after the ruling happened. Every conversation Apple executives have had in the public about this situation has all been a moral principle thing. I mean, even Steve Jobs said he's going to fight his last breath to, right this wrong.
Seth, do you see that these proceedings are just going to go on forever, or do you see that there's some sort of an end to all of this, especially now that Tim is at the helm? Do you think there is some sort of resolution that can come out of this, or is it just going through the appeals process forever?
I think actually Cook is probably trying to get out of all of this stuff. They made the deal with HTC. They're obviously in good shape with Nokia now. Mm-hmm. I guess Samsung's kind of the last. Well, obviously Motorola and Google, but Samsung's the big thing to get through. And Tim Cook said that when it came down to it, he wasn't the one who decided to do this patent battle thing. He was kind of on the other side of the fence, or he alluded to that. And
yeah, well, there was also articles saying that Tim actually didn't want it just because of the relationship as a vendor,
right?
As a supplier.
As the supply chain guy, he's talking to Samsung all the time, especially back when the lawsuits all started. So he, obviously he's not a fan of the litigation and the it's not really something that's helping Apple and helping Samsung. But now that they're in it and now that they're deep into it, I think they have to come out victorious in some way. They're not going to just walk away from this situation.
Yeah. And do you think Apple and Samsung are going to come out still as a good, with a good relationship in any sense, either as suppliers or just as general businesses? Is it just going to be nasty and it's going to go downhill from here no matter what?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way that they're going to be like they were before, and there's no shortage of rumors. Even today, I think there was something that Apple and now Nokia are going away from Samsung as suppliers just because they're part of the whole, the supply chain that gives them a strategic advantage. Like, Samsung wanted to say, hey, we're not making memory as fast as we thought. Sorry, you can't build all those iPhones you wanted to do at some point. They can't, they don't have that kind of leverage over Apple and I guess now Nokia. So I think it's smart for Apple to keep their competitors out of the out of the supply chain. And I don't see Samsung coming back in, and I don't see. I mean, it's the problem with Apple's stance on supply chain people not being in their competitive landscape is that, well, LG makes cell phones and Sharp makes cell phones, and they're all running Android, and they're all competing against the iPhone. So there doesn't leave a lot of suppliers for displays and memory and everything else that aren't going to be competitors. So, I guess they got to pick and choose, or they start buying up Sharps and LGs.
Well, they did that with the memory. The company from Israel that makes the memory, they purchased that. So it seems like they are starting to control their own supply chain and bring it in where they're doing all of the manufacturing rather than pushing it to somebody else.
I mean, I think they could vertically integrate more than they do already. I mean, from what they've bought, I say they bought engineering experience and technology experience, but I think they've sort of shied away from building their own stuff. I mean, with that $100 billion worth of cash, I think they could be building their own plants. Something I was thinking about earlier today, actually, was there was this report from the other day about the rumored watch and how Corning, Apple's main iOS device glass manufacturer, they don't have for 3 years apparently the ability to mass produce the curved glass that Apple could use in such a watch product. So I was thinking about with the hundreds of billions of dollars that Apple has, what can stop them from building their own glass manufacturing plant and knocking out those pieces of glass themselves. They don't have to wait 3 years. And I mean, if this thing is rumored to be launching by the end of this year, something gives. Something's happening. We have to find out what.
Okay. Well, let's move into the iWatch. So first, let's talk about the concept itself. Google has their Google Glasses, which are coming out in their developer preview. Their what is it called? They have it where it's the $1,500 version, and then supposedly they want to have it by the end of the year where there's a consumer version. Compare this to the which could always be $14.99, but you never know. Let's compare this to the idea of an iWatch. So, which is a better approach? Something that's on your head, or is it something that is on your wrist that you can just quickly glance at? So, or are they completely different? Are they not really in the same sphere?
Well, I think they're kind of totally different spheres. The watch is something that is behind a sleeve, or it's down in the corner, and the eyeglasses are right in front of you all the time. And a lot of people have already voiced their opinion that this is a huge violation of privacy, and they're not going to invite people with those things into their homes or whatever. And then the watch thing is like, well, how useful is that compared to a phone? I mean, when you pull the thing up, the watch face can't be lit all the time, so how does it know when you pull it up? Does it automatically light up, or do you shake it to light it up, or what exactly? Because if it was lit up all the time, it would last like 6 hours.
Yeah. And
that would be useless for a watch. So, I mean, there's all kinds of usability issues you have to think about with the watch. And the question is like, I think, how do you use technology? Are you somebody who needs technology all the time? And I think those are the Google Glasses type people. Or do you need technology, sparingly? And I think that those are the people who, maybe not sparingly, but more passively. Those are going to be the people who are more into a watch type of thing.
Yeah. Well, you as an Android and an iOS person, do you see yourself using both at the same time? Even like, would that be a possibility?
I'll try both of them. I guess it'll turn. I mean, I have no idea how interesting either one will be.
Yeah.
I don't wear a watch right now, and I don't have glasses, so like both things would be a pretty radical change to my situation. And like, to be honest with you, I'd probably feel weirder. Probably feel weird with glasses, but a watch it'd be kind of strange too, because I haven't worn a watch in like a decade.
See, I think the one interesting thing for me is that Google Glasses will use Google Plus for any of its social experiences. So when you want to share a photo, when you want to learn more about a place or a person possibly in the future if you want to learn, what they're into. And for me, I don't use Google Plus. I know that you have pretty much 900,000 people that have circled you on Google Plus, but I don't really see it as a place for popular social interactions. So do you see that maybe the Google Glasses will not succeed in that social area, or maybe Google Glasses will bring more people to Google Plus because of its social features?
I'll defer to Mark on that one.
I mean, I think the people who use Google Plus are pretty well integrated into the ecosystem already. I mean, Google kind of pushes Plus on you, and they're going to be selling these $1,000 or so glasses versus Google.com. Everyone visits that. It's the most viewed website in the world. So I don't think the glass will make any noticeable or substantial impact on the community that's already out there. I mean, when you think about how many units of glass they'll sell versus how many people access Google.com, it's their homepage each day, it's laughable. So I also want to piggyback on Seth a little bit. He was saying about the glass kind of puts technology on your face. Everyone sees it, and you see it all the time, and you're noticeable of it. The watch kind of like pushes technology aside. And Steve Jobs and Apple, their whole mantra is the intersection of technology and liberal arts, getting the technology out of the way, and making a wearable computer that's a watch is the total Apple approach. Like if Apple were to make a wearable computer, the first thing I would think of is a watch, because people are used to wearing a watch on their wrist. It's not weird to many people, and you're not putting it on your face. It's not noticeable. It could be easily tucked away. It's versatile. You can run with it. You can walk with it. I mean, imagine jogging with those Google Glass on. You're going to have your $1,500 shades broken in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's interesting that you say that, though, because Google has been pushing Google Glasses as something that pushes technology and just makes it so that it's there, and it's not something that's intrusive. So you can take a picture without having to pull out a phone and take a picture, but you just press, or you say, okay, Glass, take a picture.
The glass is intrusive, in my opinion. I mean, talking to yourself and it's worse than Siri when you think about it. I mean, I think Google Glass is very cool, but I don't think it's very practical. I mean, I'm curious to how they're going to price this thing, because that's going to be a big point. Like, what are people going to pay to try this thing out? And I think what Seth reported, the Google stores, I don't think Google will be making these stores if they realize that Google Glass would be tangible without having to actually try it on physically. They're going to need to sell these things. So I think just because they're making the stores, like Seth said, I think the prices are not going to be low enough for people to order it online and try it. People are going to need to put these on their face before they make their decision. It's like you're going to test drive a car before you buy a car.
That's true.
Well,
versus
I think in the past, Google has shown that they are very engineer-driven, which sometimes means that they have a disconnect from the general public. They don't really make products that the general product can connect with. So even though I loved Google Wave, that can be an example where engineers loved it, software engineers, like people that love that kind of in-depth communication love it, but the general public just thought it was a very gross display of communication. So it might be that Google still has that, where they don't truly connect with the community or with just people in general. So they might be still too engineer-driven and not really have that filter to say, even though engineering-wise this is cool, will the general public use it?
I mean, feature-wise, I think it's very cool. It's something that I think the public will want to use. But does it mean it's practical? Because when you think about glass versus a watch, the watch can do most of what glass is going to be able to do. It's just going to be in a more practical fashion. Or, that's a pun. More practical form, on your wrist versus on your face. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to be seen in public wearing glass, to be honest.
Yeah.
I care about my appearance.
You see, the one thing I was thinking
3-4 years
of
down the road, I wouldn't doubt these things get heavily integrated into existing sunglasses and glasses. And once these things are integrated unobtrusively, I wouldn't doubt a lot of people are going to wear them. And another thing I was thinking about, like my parents both wore glasses for most of their lives, and they got LASIK eye surgery a few years ago, similar times, and they didn't like wearing glasses. They didn't like being seen glasses. The pressures of forgetting your glasses, all that sort of stuff. Why would someone in those shoes want to put something on their face that they got rid of in the first place? I mean, I know when you think of like eye surgery or whatnot, like people don't do it just because they don't want to wear glasses, but because they want to see as well. But it still goes both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a great point. Like, people go through LASIK surgery to get glasses off their head. They have surgery on their eyes. So, like, is just these features that Google is offering enough to make people wear glasses that don't, like me, for instance? I mean, I kind of want to try them, but, like, long term, I don't know if I want to use them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, these things are going to be in my drawer. Yeah, I can tell you right now. Like,
just like all the
watch
Android tablets.
The watch just sounds so cool and practical to me. Like, I wouldn't leave my house without it because it's not obtrusive and it's going to do everything I want to do. I mean, I honestly can't wait to get my hands on whatever Apple's making in the watch space.
My fear on the watch is that it's not going to have as many of the features as I would want. What I think is cool is, and I think Bloomberg touched on it a little bit, is that Apple's working with some biometrics, and they have like Arthur Levinson on their board, so there are no slouches in the biometrics area. But like, obviously right now you can check your pulse, and Nike has all the Fitbits and stuff out there. But there's all kinds, like, you could build apps that, if your pulse starts going up, if you're a heart patient or whatever, and you wear this thing, and you start having a heart attack, you could like call an ambulance or whatever. And I mean, there's all kinds. I mean, that's tip of the iceberg type stuff. There's so much you could probably do with that. And then, like, if you can actually, I know there's some things out there that are doing blood sugar, so diabetics could obviously use something like that. And if athletes would know, like, hey, I need to drink some Gatorade right now because my blood sugars are low or whatever. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, let's get more into with the iWatch. There are 79 Apple patents that use the word wrist. And so the spring is wide open, but now The Verge has it so that the sources are saying that there's a delay due to the battery issues. So
I don't know if they said a delay. They were just saying that the batteries, they're struggling with the batteries right now, but they're still trying to get it out by end of year, which makes sense to me.
Yeah, but I mean, then even still, what's because there really hasn't been, except for like our Retina upgrades, this spring has been quite quiet, and we don't really see anything happening until WWDC. So that's a really long time where Apple's actually not coming up with any products. Of course, last year they pushed out products pretty much every couple months. So is it going to be that everyth's really quiet until WWDC?
I think the iMore rumor that there's going to be an iPad 5, which we've already seen the back shell from in April. I think they'll probably announce some other stuff then. Hopefully, like, maybe some new Pro machines, or maybe a Retina Pro that doesn't absolutely just suck. And
how about like software? Like, they've really been lacking on the Mac. So, I mean, iOS especially, and they'll take care of that WWDC.
What is iWork? Right now, iWork 11? Is iWork?
No, iWork 09, January 2009.
Nice.
So that was from their last Macworld. Like, the current iWork was released at Macworld.
Right. So obviously, this is all back burner stuff for them.
Yeah.
Like, if we get around to it, we'll take a look at that stuff. Or where they
when you think
the
about
interns
it,
working on it.
It's not like the iWork people have been like in a corner or something. Like, they completely made an iOS version, and they've been updating that actually pretty rapidly. So I think their decisions to move, people off the Mac side to get it onto iOS was, that was a big move that probably helped them sell millions of these iOS devices. And what do you think about what iWork might be lacking right now? I mean, I don't know what it's lacking.
I think even for me, like yesterday at Facebook's announcement, they had some really, really cool animations with how they did their keynote in the background, where things were moving around in very unique ways and things were displaying.
They've added some keynote animations and point updates. between. Like I think
Yeah,
they
but
did some
even
last
still,
year
like, I
actually.
don't think that didn't seem like it was something that was created in PowerPoint in a keynote. They seemed like they either created it as a graphic or like a video in some sense that was embedded into the keynote. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to build cooler ways to, like, Prezi now, Prezi.com, they have the really,
Yeah,
really
that's
cool presentations, and Keynote is nowhere near that. Well, it's solid. It's an app. It's really worthwhile. There's a lot of progress that can be made for iWork, and iLife has kind of been sitting around too. So there's still, I think, where a lot of the times we see where iOS makes a lot of innovation, and then that innovation is brought back to the Mac, as we saw even in one keynote that was all about bringing stuff back to the Mac. I think there's an opportunity to use the Mac and its powerful CPUs, GPUs, whatever else it is, to build new features, to test it out with these huge CPUs, and then bring them back down to iOS in a smaller package. So I see where we can finally go back to iOS if we can focus on using the powerful CPUs that we have nowadays rather than the CPUs that were out in 2009.
I have a theory. So like you were saying, the last two Mac OSs, they were, bringing stuff back from the iPhone and the iPad to the Mac. Lion basically had no new features to the new to the Apple ecosystem. They're all taken from iOS. Same exact thing with Mountain Lion. And when you think about the iPhone OS right now and the Mac OS, they are level for level on feature sets. The Mac isn't missing more than Maps and Siri and a couple other things from iOS. We have two major operating systems coming out this year. We have 10.9 and we have iOS 7. Both of those operating systems, the two current operating systems, Mountain Lion and iOS 6, they're leveled on features. So whatever 10.9 introduces and whatever iOS 7 introduces, they're going to be both completely new feature sets to the world. Now, 10.9 still hasn't been announced at like a pre-developer preview, and nor is iOS 7. We're expecting that in June at WWDC. What if they haven't shown 10.9 yet ahead of WWDC like they did with Lion and Mountain Lion, because they don't want to spoil iOS 7, because again, the features are going to be leveled out, and they don't want to give away everything in iOS 7 if they do a developer preview in February or March or April of 10.9, and vice versa.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that iOS 7 is just going to be a powerhouse, just because I feel like, even going into Siri, where we went from iOS 5 to iOS 6, and all they added was sports scores, and they added the movie tickets. And I know we've talked about this in past podcasts, but it was a whole entire year for them to add that little bit to Siri. And I think iOS 7 is a good time for them to kind of quell all of the worries that are happening with Android taking over and all that fun stuff, even though, of course, the market share kind of shows that iOS
Right, but you see what I'm saying, though, right? Like, it would make more sense if they didn't show 10.9 until the same time as iOS 7 in June, so they don't give anything away.
Yeah. Well,
announcing Mountain Lion in February last year was appropriate because none of those features were new.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess going back to nothing launching until. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's only if there's feature parity, and I think
of course there's going to be feature parity.
Well, Apple's kind of prioritized iOS. I think we can agree to that. And even if they didn't prioritize iOS feature-wise, there's an order of magnitude more iOS devices than Macs. But even if they didn't, they would do something where they would release a beta so that developers could put their apps on the Mac OS to make sure everything works without all the new features. And then when the final was ready to come out, then they throw in all the new features. So I don't know if
have they ever done that?
Last year.
Last year with Mountain Lion?
Yeah.
Mountain Lion only had a few secret features though, like nothing that mattered much. Dictation, power nap were like these secret features. But nothing else was that secret. I think Leopard actually, they had the initial Leopard thing, and they said, we have some secret stuff coming next year, and we'll talk about that next year. So
that was also Snow Leopard or whatever.
Yeah, so they did. So that makes sense, but it would be weird, but sensible.
Well, let's think of how also if
because they could get the
isn't gonna be
kernel
coming
out and the underlying changes out, and then keep the user-facing stuff for the later previews.
Right, that's what I think.
App compatibility, like they could keep the APIs because like a lot of stuff with the new operating systems, when you're running your apps against it, like if the app APIs are not compatible, they don't want the apps
The
crashing.
problem is though
They
is
just
that
skip APIs.
they're worried about Mark going through all the code and pulling out all the new features. So that's
Oh,
why
yeah, I don't do that anymore.
that's why nobody has Mac OS right now. Basically, it's because of Mark Gurman.
No, don't say that.
Well, let's talk about how kind of this plays into even the Apple TV that's supposedly in the works. We still don't even know the true form factor of how that'll look. But yeah. But I mean, even let's come with the timeline that we have for this year. Which will come first, even, or will the Apple TV? We were talking about a while ago where there might be an SDK that comes out in the spring or the summer, and then the device itself doesn't come out until the end of the year.
That was with,
what's the timeline look like?
I mean, in terms of TV stuff this year,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really. Maybe something in the fall, like a set in the fall. But would they really put both of their next post PC devices out in the same year? Like, there was 3 years between the iPad and the iPhone. Are they really going to do two devices and put all their eggs in one basket in 2013? A watch this year and a TV 2 years down the road makes more sense to me. But, I think they definitely need to touch the TV in some way. In 2010, they did the big Apple TV revamp, restructured the hardware and the software. Last year, they added a faster chip to it for the 1080p. And this year, I think the SDK is the next big thing for it. I don't think the hardware needs to change. I just think it's a software thing, and they haven't cracked that software. Basically, the big thing that it comes down to, I know Seth and I discuss this all the time, it's hard to think of something that a $3,000 hardware TV set can do that the Apple TV $99 box can't do with a software update. And Apple's a software company. They'll figure that out. So it's hard to see, really, in my opinion. I mean,
there's new technology coming, like 4K TVs, and there's no content
right,
for that yet. But yeah, I agree with you. To me, it's not even a done deal. Like, I don't even know if there's going to be an Apple TV.
Well, I mean, Jimmy on the YouTube comments is talking about iOS 7 bringing better integration with Apple TV, and maybe it'll be that with WWDC this summer they could push for iOS 7 10.9 and the new Apple TV kind of merging together to bring a new experience on the desktop, on mobile, and in the living room on the TV. So could it just be that they finally bring it all together?
What's the big deal to add a functionality in the remote app? You click the button, you can use the remote app on your iPhone. I think Seth said this is like a Siri input to the Apple TV. I mean, this is all software stuff. That's not hard for Apple to do based on what they've done in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I see it. I wish they would maybe come out with a really powerful Apple TV that's just a little tiny, another hockey puck, but also they could have their own massive Thunderbolt displays, but of course it would just be a display or a TV by itself. So I think maybe they'll give people the option where if somebody is a really big fan of awesome televisions or awesome Thunderbolt displays, they can go ahead and get that. Or if they already have a TV that they're fine with, then they can always go ahead and get another $99 hockey puck or a $200 hockey puck, whatever else it is.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. So, Apple's also about making money, if not only about making money, but a big priority is making money. And there are people who, there's surveys that they do all the time, and people are like, yeah, I'll buy an Apple TV, like 40% margin, whatever. As long as it's got a logo, I'll buy it.
Yeah.
And this is a lot of people. A lot of people love their iPhones, they love their Apple stuff. So, like, is Apple going to turn away from that money? I don't know. I mean, they might just do it. I mean, it's like a big cinema display. We were saying, like, at CES, they have this sharp 4K 32-inch display. When I saw that thing, I was like, that should be the Apple TV or the new cinema display or whatever. But that thing was, like, phenomenal. And if Apple can get those out into the public, I'm sure some people would pay for them.
Yeah, I also see where they do want to control the experience at all times, as we see with iOS. And so if they only come out with another box that plugs in, they still don't get rid of that massive remote that people are using, rather than just some sort of an Apple remote that is just a little bit simpler. So it's something where Apple loves controlling the experience from start to finish, and so if they're relying on other people's TV boxes, they're going to have to rely on the user knowing how to use that before they even get into the Apple TV.
Yeah, it's probably the Apple TV, it's integrated once you get into the TV, their operating system. But getting there, they lose all sorts of integration that they have when you have like a Mac or an iPhone or an iPad, for example.
Yeah.
We'll see where that goes, and I think this is a good segue into the streaming stuff. And if you want to talk more about the watch after, I'm excited to talk about that.
Well, one thing I just wanted to talk about with the watch, the last thing I had on that, do you think that the market is actually huge in any sense? Is it something that they can make billions of dollars, just like they have with the iPhone, the iPad? Especially the iPad went from $0 to billions and billions of dollars.
There was no market. There was no tablet market when Apple came out with the iPad. There was a phone market when they came out with the phone. I look at the watch as somewhere in between. There's a watch market, but it's not like what the phone market was, and it's not like what the tablet market was. So it's like somewhere in between. And if you look at it that way, it wasn't as big as a challenge as the iPad, and the iPad is this big success. So,
I actually have something to add to that. When the original iPhone came out, the big thing was that it's an iPod, the best iPod ever. It's a phone, the most functional phone ever, and it's an internet communication device. So it's three different things that are pretty big deals. It's a tripod, right. Good segue for something else later. But when you're talking about this phone, or sorry, when you're talking about this watch, you're not just talking about a watch, right? You're talking about a biometric sensor, like all the Fitbits and Nike Fuel Bands and all those things out there. So it's that. And then it's also, obviously, a watch, but it's a watch that has all these notifications and all these communication signals that it can get from your phone or from your computer. And it's also like a little, you take it off your wrist and you put it on the table and you get your little notifications while you're working, so you don't have to pull out your phone. And like, oh, my wife is updating our Facebook, and oh, all this other stuff is happening, but I don't need to really look at, I don't need to bring it up on my computer. It's just like little alerts happening. So it's like, there was smartphones before the iPhone, but then when the iPhone came along, it was the best communications device. It was the best web browser. It was the best iPod. So when you're thinking about the iWatch or whatever it is, it's going to change if it's real. It's going to change what people use watches for, right? So it's going to be a sensor, like it's going to sense what you do, and people are going to build apps that like check your blood pressure and tell you when to eat or whatever. So I mean, all these things together make it a new product category. Whereas, there's all kinds of stuff out right now already that, the notifications on my watch, that kind of stuff has been around for quite a bit of time. So I think Apple has an opportunity here.
I think calling it iWatch is really the wrong word, and I think it's confusing people. Like people not really in the tech sector, if I talk to, would you buy an iWatch? I'm like, no, I don't want to wear an Apple-made watch. I mean, I have my other watch. I mean, they're going to need to come up with a better name than iWatch for that reason. I mean, it's really just going to throw off so many people because they're trying to make this product, they're trying to break into this market, and then they're going to call it something that we're familiar with as being an analog, static thing. So.
Right. Well, let's talk about naming, actually. So this week, Ken Siegel was at U of A, the University of Arizona, and he actually, first of all, I think it's pretty funny that he was wearing a watch, which obviously he has no close relationship with Apple anymore because he's working actually with Ron Johnson at JCPenney.
Oh, really?
He's working on their retail stores, and he's working on their advertising. He worked with the advertising agency to take care of their advertisements with Ellen DeGeneres as well.
Oh, interesting.
And so one of the actual interesting things he said was that with JCPenney, they're doing the same thing where they have massive warehouses that are mini JCPenney's, just like they used to do with the Apple stores when they first came out.
Oh, interesting.
When they were first working on the Apple stores, they just had these massive warehouses that they blocked out to kind of say, okay, this is where the Genius Bar is going to go, this is where the software is going to go, and that's how they were kind of able to perfect everything. And now they're doing the same thing with JCPenney's to create a good experience that people want to come into. They're making supposedly big aisles. They're putting great products. They're actually going to have a Genius Bar there as well. So if you have questions, you can ask people about your clothing, which is a very interesting. I actually don't believe in Ron Johnson's theories and how he's working with JCPenney, but Ken definitely believed in him and said they were good friends and that they're working together on some really great things. But the other thing he talked about that we were just talking about with the naming is that he talked about some of the names of what the iPhone could have been called. And so he was going through where it could have been called the Telepod just because it sounds a little futuristic. He was also talking about calling it the Mobi because it's like mobile, but it sounds a little personal. There's also iPad, which is interesting because obviously we have the tablets called that now. But there's also the Tripod, which is the phone, the internet, and the iPod. So it's the Tripod. So he had a lot of stuff that he really there was some information that he talked about that obviously was already known, like the Mini Mac or MacMan. MacMan as the name of the iMac, and then he was actually talking about how he was the one who came up with the name iMac, and him and his team at least, and so he told Steve Jobs about that name, and so he told him he had a bunch of other names that he told him, and he said iMac, that's the one we're really pushing for. And Steve Jobs said, that sucks, I don't like it, And so then they went away for a week, and he came back, he presented a few names, and even though he was afraid Steve was just going to be, irate for him not listening, he showed iMac again, and he said, come on, this is the name you really need to go with. And so Steve said, I still hate it, but I don't hate it as much as last week. And so then they went off on their merry ways. They didn't actually kind of decide on a name after that. But then Ken saw Steve was showing off the iMac with the actual name on the device to other people. So he's like, oh, I guess that's the name he decided with. So it was kind of interesting to see how Steve worked. And of course, we've heard this in all of the bios and everything else like that. But it's something where he won't go, this sucks, this sucks. You know what? Actually, you're really great. Thank you for that idea. It was more like you suck, you suck. And then suddenly it's just the product name. So I'm also curious, maybe I'm curious how Steve Jobs might have been involved with a watch, or if at all. Obviously, he had to have been thinking about it or kind of brought it up at times, but maybe he was involved with the naming of that product as well. Or it'd be interesting to know if he made any influence in kind of the design decisions or how the functionality works.
I wouldn't be surprised if he was working on it, not intimately, but if that was on his radar. I mean, they were looking at products years and years in advance, so I wouldn't be surprised that he had influence on it. I think the general category of wearable computing is something that Steve had a big influence on. If you look at the glasses, I can imagine they're putting different things on the table, and they're like, should we go for the head? Should we go for this or that? And, they show him these glasses. I went out Steve Jobs, expletive, get out of here, you're fired, right? And then the wrist gets technology out of the way.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what Steve was good at. All the bios, everyone who talks about him, it's always the big picture stuff. And choosing which route they're going to take is very big picture. Are they going to go for the glass, or are they going to go for the wrist? If they're going for the wrist, Apple's engineering and design teams, software, they'll take care of the rest. It's just that inch of direction. And I think looking at Apple 5, 10 years, 15 years down the road, that's where I think Steve's lack of presence is going to be most tested.
Okay.
Not the details, but the bigger picture.
Yeah. Well, even also, I think Steve was pushing the networks a lot. He pushed a lot to make it so that iTunes was possible with the 99 cents. So let's talk about with the music streaming service. It looks like there's a delay now just because they're having trouble with the royalty setup. So first of all, let's talk about what the music streaming service would look like. Would it just be another Pandora, or how do you think it would be laid out, Seth?
Well, we saw those buttons, and I don't know if that was a final design or something just left in there or whatever. But in one of the betas, somebody tipped us that those were in there, and we took a look, and they were there. And it's just a couple buttons saying radio, and who knows what menus those bring up. But it probably would look something similar to what Spotify's been working at this for a while, and they probably have kind of gotten what the radio is going to look like. And knowing Apple and what they've done before with radio, they would probably have, hey, you like this song on the radio, on this channel, why not just own it? And here's a link to iTunes. And Apple's probably trying to sell that to the record labels, saying, hey, look, we're gonna
get you more sales.
Yeah, we're gonna get you more sales. Give us a little bit of a break, and by a little bit of a break, that means like we want to sell it for a quarter of the price that Pandora is, or half the price, or whatever. So those leaks to the New York Post this week were clearly from the record labels who are pissed at Apple because they wouldn't budge on their prices. And anything to the New York Post is usually not record, but entertainment industry people complaining. So what is Apple's streaming service going to look like? I have no idea. It sounds like Google's going to be actually first in this one. The Google side of us reported that Warner had already signed up with Google, and the other three major music labels were on the way to signing, and the Google service would probably be ready soon. What I don't really understand with Google is that when I want to listen to something that I don't have locally already, I usually just go to YouTube and I do a search, and there's like 17 versions of the song I want to listen to. So I kind of don't understand what you get out of a Google service. I guess it's an easier interface than having to search YouTube. So every time you want to, if you're in the car or something, but you can make playlists or whatever, and listen to it on your phone.
Well, one thing I'm thinking about, does it really matter that Apple needs to do this radio service? Because they make what, like 1% of their money or 2% really comes from iTunes sales, and obviously it's supportive of their devices. I mean, that's how they get people, is with the apps, with the music, with everything else like that. But is it really necessary for Apple to make this radio service?
I don't think it's 100% necessary, but they do want to keep people involved, and they want to keep people on the platform. And they don't want people, what if Google makes a Google radio streaming thing, and then there's that one more Google app on your phone, and, your iPhone, and all of a sudden, like, I just have an Android phone now. So I think it's important. I don't think it's going to make or break Apple's fortunes. I know there are iTunes revenue is a very small part of what Apple makes in a year. But these are like little things that could add up at some point.
Okay. There was also a mention of iAds playing into it all. iAds really haven't been talked about at all in probably the past year or so, especially because we've seen where they haven't been doing so hot. And so, how do you see the financial side of all of this? Is it going to be another iTunes match, or is it going to be something where they throw some iAds at you while you're listening, or how do you kind of see that laying out?
Honestly, I don't know. I know iAds has not been Apple's crowning achievement over the last couple years, and I think if you're paying for music, you don't want to have ads in there. Otherwise, just listen to Pandora or whatever.
Or it's just like Hulu, except for audio.
Right. Yeah. Apple's not really like a put ads in it company, which is why iAds is kind of a weird. I guess they have to fend off Google and their apps, but I don't know.
Right, I'm kind of confused about that. Like, where?
Well, they could always be displaying on, if it's on.
But it's music. You have it in your pocket.
I know, but I guess on the desktop side, it would make sense. But
no, not really. Like, do you have iTunes open when you're listening to iTunes?
No. They could do the Pandora crappy ads that punch in every song, but that's really frustrating, and it's not
It's not,
not very Apple-like, especially when we were just talking about earlier about controlling the whole experience. Okay. Well, do you guys have anything else you would want to add about the streaming service?
Yeah, what it did make sense to me was they said, the New York Post, that Apple is considering attaching this radio thing as a two-pack with iTunes Match. And that actually makes a lot of sense to me. Two-pack, two-pack, two-pack.
You got it.
Yeah. They're similar cloud-based types of things. Streaming, basically, iTunes Match, you can upload your stuff and stream it. And then you could basically just stream everything else from the store on the radio service. And those two services make so much sense if they were combined into one yearly fee. So I agree on that. I disagree on iAd, or I just am not thinking big enough on that. Probably.
I think we once again we touched upon this on the last podcast, but the idea of this radio service integrating with Genius is really where I see it being really valuable. So if you're listening to a song, you right-click it, you say Genius, and it starts playing songs that you don't have on your library.
Well, it's Pandora.
Songs. Yeah. Then you can go ahead and right away purchase them. And so not only it would be a way for you to explore new music and find new things that you like, rather than just something that you listen to constantly.
Right. Like I always looked at Genius as Pandora of your
own music,
existing library. So I guess this radio thing, the way you're putting it, would be like Pandora based on Apple's library of what you listen to on a subscription fee. So it's neat.
Yeah, and I think it would work out really, really well. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that watch post with the executives?
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to go quick to our sponsor here. So Addiction is a beta. It's a new social network. It's all about the things you're addicted to. So we all have those times when we're completely binging on Netflix, when we watch the same show over and over again. And Mark actually has a shirt here for Addiction. So go check it out at addiction.to. We have a beta code just for 9to5Mac listeners, which is 9to5Mac. Who would have guessed it? And so go check it out. It's in beta. There'll be some new features coming up in a couple weeks here, but go create an account and go see what it's like. All right, so let's talk about the executives. So you wanted to touch upon how, well, first of all, they're all wearing watches, which I think is pretty funny.
Well, I mean, it's not funny. Like, people of that wealth and of that stature, it's unsurprising to see them walking around with those tens of thousands of dollars worth of watches. What is more interesting, I mean, I didn't just take the obvious that Phil Schiller, Johnny Ive, all these people, they're wearing these wristwatches. We looked farther into it in terms of what their skill sets are. The watches, it was just something interesting. Look at Dan Riccio. He wears a watch, so what? This guy, he's now the senior vice president of all design, engineering, at Apple. He moved up the ranks fairly quickly. When you look at what he's done in terms of projects he's led while at Apple, his experience in terms of the watch is critical. He was, prior to being senior vice president of all engineering, he was head of iPad. And the big deal about the iPad is how they were able to shrink down all these components and able to still retain crazy battery life. Verge was saying that Apple's having some issues with the battery. This guy, with his battery expertise from the iPad, he's a big deal for getting these batteries put together for the watch. But an even bigger deal is he was critical in terms of the manufacturing of the first MacBooks with the sealed-in batteries. So he's a big deal there too. On the battery side, of course, the battery, like Seth was saying, like if this thing doesn't last for days, it's pointless, right? Yeah, when you look at Schiller, like Bloomberg,
the iOS devices were so small that they made it so Apple kind of had to push to build really, really awesome batteries. But I think the iWatch will be even more of that, where we can finally see maybe a full 10 times larger, we need batteries that have more capacity, because I mean, even my iPhone lasts like 5-6 hours, and so I have to charge it throughout the day. But if we're able to use this iWatch experience to really innovate in the battery space, I think it'll be a good thing that can even be passed on to iOS and to the Mac devices as well.
Sure. And then you look at Greg Joswiak, like we found a video of him was going around the world demoing apps. You know, he's the head of marketing for the App Store on the iPhone, iPod, all that jazz. So, you know, he was talking a lot about fitness apps, and he actually took someone's blood pressure on video with an iPhone. So, and Seth was talking about the biometrics. So clearly he has an interest there. Also interesting is Bob Mansfield. When you piece this whole thing together, it's incredible. The guy wears a watch. So what? New York Times put out the report after Forstall and Browett were forestalled, talking about, you know, how Mansfield has been working alone on mobile appliances, apps, and hardware that integrate with health stuff. Fine. No one really connected that to a watch back then. And then Bloomberg comes out with their first report like a week ago about the iWatch, and they had this whole section. It read just like the New York Times report about, you know, the different health stuff. They were talking about Mansfield. To put it two and two together, it's clear what Mansfield was focused on. And then another thing we heard James Foster, who was apparently running this watch project according to Bloomberg's report from a couple of weeks ago. Foster, he works closely, a good friend of Mansfield's, even though Mansfield doesn't run the hardware division anymore. So you put it all together, and clearly there's something there more than just a rumor. They're clearly pulling that string. And then piece everything together. Cook wears this Nike Fuel Band. And at the D conference, the 2012 D conference, he said, similar to what he's been saying about the Apple TV, he likes the category, he's interested in it. He wears a Fuel Band, but can it change your behavior? And then he said that book hasn't been written yet. So they're probably going to write that book later this year. So there's just so much evidence on so many levels. So.
Yeah, and if you think about, well, why now? Why not last year? Why not whatever? And you know, I don't know if I believe the Verge thing on the batteries, but like everything's kind of coming together. Like the processors are getting smaller and smaller and less power hungry. The displays, you know, you're finally getting like Retina type displays that aren't using, like maybe this Sharp EXO stuff is, I mean, it looks great on, I have to say it looks great on a regular display, but maybe it makes sense to do it on a small display. And Sharp's also doing the bendable displays, so not bendable glass, just bendable display. So and I think the New York Times, that's kind of been leading the way on the bendable glass watch interface. So like all these technologies are kind of coming together right now, and you know, I don't know if the battery is going to prevent Apple from releasing a product that they're proud of, but you know, I don't think Apple's going to be like Sony or like Pebble, where they're going to say a day or two of power is fine. I think they're going to want to say something like you have a week on this.
I agree with your points. Like they're valid in my opinion, but I kind of agree. I'm kind of looking at it completely opposite to you. Like I thought you were actually going to say that, you know, Pebble and Sony, they say 1 to 2 days is fine, or 2 to 3 days is fine. I would look at it as Apple would say 1 day is fine, 12 hours is fine, 16 hours is fine. Steve Jobs, when they were talking about the first iPhone when it first came out, people would be like, oh, you're reading books on it, you don't want to plug it in like a Kindle. Steve Jobs said, no big deal, just plug it in like you plug your phone in. Okay, clearly Apple doesn't focus on batteries for a week. They focus on you can charge it every night. Who cares? You're going to end up charging it every night anyways, Steve Jobs said about the iPad. When you look at what a smartwatch can do, it's primarily, I mean, we don't know how Apple's going to take it. Are they going to take an accessory platform or, you know, intersection of the two? It's going to be heavily reliant on your phone. The phone's batteries are not going to get bigger. This phone will not last a week. What is a watch without the phone? So it doesn't matter if the watch can last a week if your phone's going to last 6 hours.
Yeah, I guess if they make it easy to take off, or maybe it comes with a.
Of course, it's going to be easy to take off. I mean, if you look at the clasp patent, that thing is ridiculously easy. If you look at like a curved glass thing, you press it on, you take it off. I mean, if you have it like a leather band, sure, that's a little bit of a drag. Do people sleep with their watches? I don't know. I don't sleep with mine.
I don't have a watch.
Yeah.
You guys?
Yeah, no. I wear a watch sometimes.
I do not. Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay.
We'll see. It really comes down to how Apple wants to take it. Do they want to go the platform approach? Do they want to go the accessory approach, or they want to intersect the two?
Yeah, and it sounds like, but it does sound like that something's going to happen. Like I kind of didn't think much of the watch rumors last year because it didn't sound like they were, usually when something's about to happen, the rumors start coming from a lot of different angles, trustworthy angles, not just angles. And I think Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal are all saying iWatch. So I think this is probably going to be one of those things that happens.
Yeah, and when you look at, like we were talking about the timeline in the beginning of the Hangout, in terms of what Apple's doing, iMore said iPad's in April and the new phone in August. They're taking care of everything they got to take care of this year in the first 3 quarters of the year. You have that big fourth quarter or first quarter to take care of. What better product than to fit in that watch?
Yeah.
Because that gap's going to be there. They're getting the phone. If they get rid of the phone in August, there's going to be nothing between August and December. It's ridiculous if you look at this year. They were knocking stuff out of the park, September, October, November, December. They're not going to just leave those 4 months open during the biggest holiday quarter ever. I mean, the biggest quarter of the year. So.
Right.
Okay. Well, that is our 9 to 5 podcast for this week. We'll be back next week with another one of these. I'm sure we'll have a lot of new stuff to talk about that time. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week. Thank you.